Hello? No? Yeah? Can you guys hear me? No? Shit. Hello? Can you guys settle down real quick, please? All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of the Rails Decal. I'm going to try to put this on and tell me if it's good. Can you guys hear me or in the back? All right, so I know a lot of people are missing today because it is, oh shit. Okay, I know a lot of people are missing today because it's a 170 midterm. And yeah, so I don't know why there's feedback happening, but I guess I'll just hold this. All right, so the topic we're gonna cover today is the last half of CRUD, which is update and delete, and within Rails, the methods would be edit, update, and delete. And another topic we're going to cover towards the end is relationships, or how two objects in your database are related to each other. All right. So first off, logistics. Homework 2 should be graded by now. If you don't have like an issue on your repo or a comment on your last commit, let us know. And so either email me or the staff and we'll get to it as soon as possible. And we are still in the process of grading homework 3. And just a heads up that this week's homework isn't a homework, it's gonna be your first project. You're one of the 2 projects. And you're gonna have until the week after spring break to do it. So yeah, that's like 3 weeks practically. I mean, if you don't use your spring break, it's like 2, so it's pretty chilling, I would say. All right, like I said earlier, what we're gonna cover today is the last half of CRUD, which is update and delete. And the methods on your controllers will correspond to the methods edit, update, and that's actually a typo right now. I'm gonna fix this slide afterwards, but it's on your controller, the most common thing to see is not actually the word delete, but to destroy, the word destroy. And I'm gonna break down each method for you right now. So the edit page is the page where you get the form to edit information. So this would correspond to your new page in the first half of CRUD, which is the create and read. And the update is the actual endpoint. So this is where after you fill out the information or the changes on this form, when you click submit your form, it'll go to the update endpoint. So this maps onto the create of the topics we covered last week. And the last endpoint we're gonna talk about is, well, on the slide it says delete, but in your actual controller will be destroy. And what that will be is, well, there's no form assigned to that because you don't really need to fill out that much information to delete. You just hit delete and things should be destroyed. Again, with edit and update, we're gonna still require the strong parameters for the same reasons as before. And this is because for the same reason security, if you allow anyone to create a new user with like the Boolean of admin being true. You shouldn't allow people to first create their user and then edit their admin status to be true. And another topic we're going to cover today within PaaS is the idea of resources. It's probably pretty hard to see right now, but if you remember before in your routes.rb, I defined a lot of things like, oh, get users to users hashtag index, and like get user /:ID to users show. But those are very common operations, and what Rails allows us to do is create something called a resource within our paths, and it'll generate a lot of paths for us. And I'll show you an example of using that during live coding section. And the last topic we're going to cover in the live coding is your relationships. So, like on your Facebook accounts, right, or your Twitter accounts, you have your posts, you have your tweets, right? And those are related to you. It's not like you have a post knows which user it belongs to, and the user knows which post it has written. And what we're gonna cover today is how we could do that in Rails to have relationships between things, because so far we've only been creating like single standing, like, oh, users or to-dos or cats, and we have no way to relate them yet. The first relationship we're going to talk about is the has-one relationship. And obviously these pictures are really small, but when you look at the slides, they should be more clear and they'll be covered in our live coding. So if model A has a has-one relationship with model B, then model B, on the model B table, right? On the table of all the model Bs you have, there's going to be a column on it that is like called model A _ ID. And that will basically tell the model B object which user it belongs to, or I'm sorry, which model A it belongs to. And so the belongs to relationships is in the reverse, where model A, if model A belonged to model B, right, then model A has a column called model _B _ID. Do we have any questions so far, or do we want to just wait for that live coding to go through and see what your questions are? Yeah.
So there's a lot of cases where you can choose one or the other. So if you want to say like model A has one model B, you also say model B belongs to model A.
Yeah, for has one and belongs to, it works exactly like that, where if you create a model A and you create a model B, let's say you have a user, right? And the user, let's say, owns like a set or like an object called settings, right? Which is like, let's say it's your privacy settings, right? So then the user would has one setting object, while a setting object belongs to a user. And one of the ones we're going to cover today is also has many. So like, you know, it's not like all things are one-to-one. For example, like the first example I used was your Facebook profile. You're not going to have a single post on your Facebook profile, but rather user has many posts. And it works with the same kind of logic as model B. Like if we have model A has many of model B, then model B will have a column that's model A _ ID, and that's basically saying, oh, which model A does this model B belong to? All right, so any last questions before I get into the live coding? Yeah.
So going back to your analogy, what about the issue of like multiple ownership? So like if you post on someone's wall, that counts as that person's post sort of because it's on their wall, but it also kind of counts as your post because like you're the one that posted it. So how would you represent a relationship like that?
So that there's multiple ways you can do that. I wasn't going to cover that during this lecture. It's a little more complex. Like well, first there's multiple ways to do it. Like on a post, you can have like the profile or the user ID that wrote the post, right? And then if it can have another column called a to user ID or something, and that one could either have a user ID on it which says, hey, this was posted on somebody's wall, or that value in the column could be null, which is like, oh, I posted on my own wall, right? You could have basically some like this concept of polymorphic relationships where you could have within your user could have two kinds of posts, where you have one that's like a self-post object and one's like a post on somebody else's wall object. And so there's just many ways to go about that, and we'll cover that in a later lecture. Is that fine right now? All right, okay. So starting off, I made this, I'm gonna make this bigger. Okay. So I made this folder, lecture 61. This was basically, I just copied it off of lecture 5. So this is, all this code right now is just starting off from the last lecture we did. So if we go to apps, models, we still have our old user model with the validations. And we also have our user controller and stuff like that. This is all the same from last week. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was resources. So do you remember the command rake routes? Running it will give me a list of all the controller actions I have routed: users index, new, show, create, right? And these prefixes, which if you remember from before, within my embedded Ruby code, if I do any of these prefixes _path, I basically encode the URL into the embedded Ruby. Now I'm going to go into my routes file. Oh, yeah. Sorry, say that again? Oh, this is the same. This is the same lecture. This is just copied from last week's lecture. So basically, and also if you haven't started the homework yet, basically the homework that was assigned last week was last lecture's code, except it was annotated with comments. So if you want to go look at what's already existing, you could just basically look at the last week's homework's repo. All right. So I'm going to go to routes. Wait, can you hear me if I leave it right here in the back or no? Yeah, okay, that's perfect actually. So I go to routes.rb, right? And I have all these methods within my routes file, and it's starting to get kind of cluttered for me, right? So I was talking about resources earlier during the slides. If I type in the word resources, users, and I save, what I can do is run rake routes. And it created all these routes for me. So it already assumes that I'm going to have an index method on my users: create, new, edit, show, update, and destroy. So what I want to do, so I already had all my routes created for me, right? Like before, I manually created each route one by one, and it was kind of just to show you guys like what's happening underneath, but most people just use resources to keep their routes.rb code cleaner. And first thing I'm going to show is running Rails -p 4000. Okay, I'm starting up my Rails server right now. So if I go to localhost 4000, this was the app from before. I go to /users. And now I have an error. Does anyone know why? Probably should make it bigger. So what happened was, if you remember before, what my old rake routes looked like was, I'm actually gonna move this to a new tab. So basically, this is what changed. In my old app, I had my users, my route to the new path, right? On my index, if you remember, we had our index page, and at the bottom of it, you could click on this button, and it would go to the form for new, right? And it was under the variable users underscore new. But now when I use routes, it changed my prefix. This should have been the standard prefix, actually, where I should have actually originally written the route as new underscore user. So since that's in there, I should go fix that problem on my index.html.urb. This file is located under views, users, index. And I'm gonna increase the size of this. And that variable is wrong, so I new user path, if I put it correctly. So yeah, so it's new user, I append an underscore path to it. And when I refresh, everything is fine. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah.
Why did you just delete all those routes and listen to these? Did you put the routes somewhere else?
No, I did not put the route somewhere else. So then,
Why would you use type of routes like you have?
okay, so I just, before I type in those routes, just to kind of teach it building up, I guess, like what's happening underneath if I were to call resources, because there are like, these are basically what we call CRUD operations, right? And this is like the basic part of a Rails application, but then usually apps do more things than like do the basic create, update, read, or destroy. They do more complicated logic that's like sometimes non-standard, right? And then I guess showing how to do the non-standard way would allow you guys to like, so in case you had like a different method that did something slightly different, like let's say you had like an increment counter endpoint, right? It doesn't fall under any of these, it doesn't fall under any of these standard things right here. So then you know how to say like, oh, it's basically updating this count. I kind of want to make a put or a patch request to this endpoint and just try to teach you guys how to do any kind of non-standard stuff along with it. Yeah. In routes.rb folder, you just do resources, users. Do you guys know what the difference between symbols and strings are by any chance? So you're probably wondering like what these things are when I do like colon, a letter, like this thing, that's called a symbol, right? And it's exactly like a string. So this would be equal to this, except that this one's immutable and this one is mutable. Like, you know how Java strings are immutable? This is, practices the same concept while this one is mutable. It affects performance, I guess, and it probably affects a lot more complicated things that I don't understand, but you could just simply think of these things as like immutable strings. Yeah. So, and just like an example of how inference works, if I take out like the S right here, right? Before my rake routes would say, oh, I have a user's path right here. But if I do rake routes now, it would probably only get me like a user path. Yeah, like a user index. So yeah, but since we have a user's controller and we want to map it to the user's controller, we want to keep that as the pluralized form. Okay, go to new page. This is pretty, let's see. So the same stuff we had before, right? So one thing I also want to show you guys before we get on to yeah, question. So the index file before, I named it the incorrect name. So before, I manually defined the prefix last time to be users underscore new, but the way resources does it is they do new underscore user. Yeah, and that's how you fix it. So basically, like, to debug the error, you'd see that, oh, this variable is undefined. It's a path. I check my rake routes and see if that prefix is in my rake routes.
So it would be user path, even though the resource is called user.
Let's see. I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I believe so. So if I change this to user, I run rake. Oh wait, which one? This one has the rake routes. So it still has new user. What changed was that users was already pluralized, right? So instead of the prefix users underscore path, they'll have a user underscore index underscore path. Like Rails, I don't know if I showed you guys this before, but Rails like knows how to pluralize words. Like for example, if you do user, I believe it's called .pluralize. It does users, and it's like pretty smart too. Like if you do octopus, it turns to octopi. Except I know like one thing that doesn't work. I think it's deer. It will do deers. But yeah, this interesting Rails magic. Yeah, so that's how it does inferences. It actually looks at strings, and if you do something like user.constantize, oh, okay, I don't know the method off the top of my head, but it figure out how. If you know the term snake case and camel case, where there's like something called constant case, it knows how to like flip around between those. It has methods. If you look at the Rails source code, it'll be calling methods on the names of these classes, and then that's how it does all this inference magic. But yeah, so where was I? So it's that I check my rake routes. What I want to go to do next is do edit functionality. So sorry, I can't quite hear you. Oh, if I go to roots, yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you. I was about to embarrass myself when I flipped the thing, but thanks for saving me. What I want to define right now is the edit. And if you remember what I was saying during the slides, edit is basically the same thing as new. It's the new, but for updating things. But that, if it's updating something, that means we already have that user in the database. And if you look at the rake routes, right? When I did my resources, you see edit users actual URI pattern. This part right here, this is going to be like the kind of URL. It's users / :id/edit, which means that within our URL, we're actually picking a user to edit. So since I have the :id in our URL, I could say @user equals user.find. And all I have to do is hand it the integer, which is the ID. So @user equals user.find params ID. I'm going to create an edit.html.erb page under the view /users. And since I want it to look pretty much like the new.html.erb, I am going to go to my edit.html.erb, copy that over, and just say, just rename this form something like edit user. And I'm going to do the same logic as I did for the form. Form for @user, do f, have a name field, have an email field, and f.submit. So I'm going to first look at my first users, localhost 4000 users /1, Howard at howard.com. So if you remember from my rake routes, I could just do users /1/edit. And now I went to this page, if that makes sense. So going to the endpoint, it matched up with this, user /my ID / the word edit. I was able to, and wait, I'll just show you back the form. You see how my form is actually pre-populated? It has the information from before. And where it's getting that is Oh, crap, that's my Spotify. Okay, within my users controller, I made a query for the user of that ID, and I put it in the instance variable @user. So my view can have access to the user. And within here, form 4 will say, hey, I'm creating forms for this, for the field's name and email. But since my user.one already has like a populated name and email, what it's gonna do is it's gonna pull that from my user object and pre-populate the field with it. All right. So the other part of this is create. So basically, create. Oh, not so. Oh my, okay, I skipped to the analogy. Okay, sorry. It's supposed to be update. Define update, right? And what create is to new is what update is to edit. Basically, after I fill out the edit form, I hit submit. It's going to go to this endpoint, and I'm going to say @user @user equals user.find params ID. I'm going to say @user.update user params. Okay. So the logic that's happening right now is if I go, well, I'm just going to show you what happens when I submit this form right now. I hit update user. There's just no create template right now, but if I go to users/1, you see that I took out the D, I hit update, and now my the D from my name is gone. And what happened there is, so I already had the information pre-populated. I edited it. I took out the D. And when I hit f.submit, what form 4 recognized is @user has an ID already. If you remember from the new form, when we create this new user right here, it doesn't have an ID. It's just an empty user object. But with the one in my edit.html.urb, it actually already has an ID. So it knows to go, when I submit the form, it knows to hit the create endpoint, right? And when it hit the create endpoint, it went to users controller #create. If you look at the URI pattern, hitting the endpoint for the put in patch hits at a specific user. So that's how I could grab its ID. I had the user down here. So I find the user and basically I call update user params. And if you remember from last lecture, what user params are the strong parameters, which I define here. I say that within my params hash, there's going to be a key user that's also going to give me back a hash map. And the only thing I'm going to permit out of that hash map are the keys name and email. And that's just basically to prevent stuff like people flipping flags that you should not be flipping. All right, does anybody have any questions right now about this process or in general about this class? All right. Last thing I wanted to talk about what, in terms of this CRUD operations is destroy. So if we look at my rake routes, you see the last route defined was a delete to users:ID, and it's a delete request. It's one of the 4 HTTP verbs we were talking about. And if I make a delete request to users at a certain ID, I'm going to call users.destroy. And what kind of logic I'm going to put there is I'm going to say user equals user.find by the params. I pass in the ID. I take the user, and then all I have to do is user.destroy. and that will basically say database, delete this entry from the table. What I'm gonna do right now is right now there's no way to access this delete endpoint unless I try to make some curl request, but that's kind of over the top for this. So what I'm gonna do is go to the show view and create a link. Link to, if you remember from last lecture, you could just create a link, give it a string like, oh, delete this, cancel, delete, and we'll pass it a path. And what I have is a user path. So if you see right there that delete is under user, right? Because if I do user underscore path, it's gonna give me, if you look at the formats of the URI pattern, they're all the same. The only difference is the request you could put in it, and that's get, patch, put, and delete. So if I do link to user path user, does anyone have any idea what this is going to do right now based on what you see in the routes? Yeah. Yeah, it's going to take you to the same page. And so my delete is actually just going to the same page. I'm just going to pick a random other user for now. User.3, hit delete. What's happening right now is I'm just rerouting to the user's path. And that's because the default for a link to is using the get request, right? But if I want to change the type of request for link to, I could just say method delete, or yeah, delete. Hopefully this isn't break only. Okay, so what actually happened right now? Oh, wait, I should have showed you the Rails console. So Rails C, I'm just gonna pop up my console for you guys to look at. So user.count, right now it's 16. I should have a user 15 right now. Okay. So what actually happened, just as a quick overview, was that the user actually got deleted. I just didn't put if you remember from last lecture, you could just put a redirect to send it back to like the index, right? But I just didn't put that in. So the only error that you saw was it just didn't have a page to render right now. But more importantly, the count for all the users right now is 16, right? If I hit delete, after changing the type of request that link to is from its natural get request to a delete request, I hit delete. It's erroring out right now, but the process still went through, and you see now that my users count went down by 1. Anyone have any questions? Sorry, can you speak a little loud? Yeah, I could go use this controller. So at a destroy endpoint, we only, if you remember, it's /users/:ID. Since that was our endpoint, we were able to find the user through the parameters, and just calling destroy on it is basically saying, hey, remove user with ID whatever out of the users table. Any more questions?
Why don't you hit the sign for user?
So you only need the @ if your view actually uses it. Yeah. That being like for edit, it's actually important. For update, it would have been fine if I just did this because there's no view using it. Unless I were to redirect it to a view that asks for an @user. Not redirect. You call render. So the difference between redirect and render is render basically only shows the view, but redirect runs the method. It's totally random. thing. So then basically, if your view asks for an @user, right, and you rendered from another method that didn't have an @user, then it would probably error out. Yeah.
And the reason why this story doesn't enter a quick fix is that he has nothing to show.
That's not necessarily the reason why. It's because like where was I going? Okay, yeah, that's this one. So when I do, I'm just gonna do big routes again. Okay, so when you go to, you see, we have one same URI pattern. This is saying going to /user/:ID. We have 4 of them, and the reason why we're allowed to overload a certain endpoint is because we have like different types of HTTP requests that tells it to do different things. So basically, it allows a single endpoint to have many different actions, basically. And it's just like this common like practice that people do in the Rails community. The thing is, you can always, with a lot of them, you could actually like move around the request and make it go against the standard, but probably the people you're working with would probably be like, oh, I don't know why you did this versus doing it the standard way. And yeah, sorry. Did that answer your question? Or was, I probably got on a tangent.
I was just kind of confused why some of them have the prefix and some of them don't. So say like for patch codes and deletes.
They share the same prefix.
Use it?
Yeah, so you look at the prefix on the left, everything below that is shares the same prefix. So you see the users, the pluralized one, users_path links to, you see how the URI endpoints are exactly the same? They both match to that, and all you have to do to split between the index and create is to send a post or a get. Okay. Yeah. Patch is pretty much the same thing as delete. There's like a little, if you actually read like what the HTTP standards are supposed to be, they're going to tell you like the slight variation, but within like the community of developers, they're very interchangeable. That one's like, it's kind of up in the air about which one to use. They both approximately do the same thing. Oh no, put and patch. They're both like things to say, hey, update this resource.
Give the show about HTML.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Back in our routes, what are, sorry, we said break routes. What is like the dot format?
You could still hand it more parameters in the URL. Yeah, that's pretty much all it's saying. Yeah. It's something that not many people use, and you shouldn't really be handing too many parameters through a URL. It's kind of risky. Like, especially if you're doing something like you could technically hand in passwords through a URL, but that's not a good idea because that's going to be saved in someone's browser history. All right.
We delete a user, say you delete the first user, then will the index for the users after the first user automatically shift?
No, the indices will not shift. And the reason for that is basically, let's say we have like 10,000 users in the database. If we were to delete one user, then we have to basically update every single one of the other users. And I could just show you, which user did I just delete? 15. If I go to user/15, it's not there because it can't find user, but I believe I saw the 16. So 16 did not move down to 15.
But the next user you create will also fill the team.
No, it will not either. The next index you create will be, I believe for us it'll be 18 because I had 17 originally. It doesn't kind of like figure out which indices are empty. All right. Another kind of cool thing I want to show you guys is the concept of flashes. So what a flash is basically, it's a hash, right, within your code that disappears after one request. So I could make a request, store something in the hash, then process a view, right? And then whatever that hash had, the information in it will show up on that view just once, but if I refresh it, it will disappear. And I'm gonna show this in the create example, right? So if you remember on my user.rb, it validates that the user has a name and the presence of the name is true. That's a validation on there. So on my create method, right, I get at user params. I'll just show you from this perspective right here. I go to a new page. If I leave nothing there and I create users, what's going to do is re-render me the new page again, right? But it doesn't tell me anything. It's like, oh, what was wrong with my users? Like, let's say you forgot your password wasn't long enough, right? We had no way of showing that before, but what a flash allows us to do is you just pretend you have this magic hash map right here called flash, and you can put in any keys you want. I'm going to put in error equals user.errors.full messages. And this is just an easy way to see the errors in your user, or that should be at user, not the user class. But I'll show you an example of errors.full messages. If I go to Rails C, set u as an user.new, right? And I call u.save, it should be false because it doesn't have I didn't set a name yet. And if I do u.errors.full messages, it will tell me what the error was. And if you can't read that, it says name can't be blank. So what I'm going to do right here in my else case, so basically user.save is called, I failed to insert into my database. I'm going to go to else case, and within my flash hash, I'm going to store in users.errors.full messages and render the new. If I go to new.html.erb, I could just say some embedded Ruby in here. If flash error not what I wanted either. And key tag right here, and have that just output whatever is in flash error. Closing p tag. Okay. Now theoretically this should work. So when I hit create user, what happened was it failed to save, it went to the else case, and within my flash hash map, right, I store in the error message, which was, well, errors.full messages actually returns me an array of messages. That's why you see a bracket around it, but you could manually parse that through yourselves to make it look better. But the purpose of this is you can actually display the errors with this. And with the flash, oh wait, I don't want to sort perform resubmission, user/new. That was supposed to be disappearing. Oh, okay, you see how it disappeared? It's because a flash only lasts once, basically. After the request, it goes through I stored in errors the value, which was the error, and after the error is gone, like after that one request is over and I go back to the same page, make another request, my flash hash map becomes empty. Yeah.
What if you wanted the specific errors to be next to the specific inputs? Would you have to do like an else sort of thing?
Yeah. You could still use the flash, right? And the first way, like I guess it would be like with the information we have now, that the way we would do it is say, hey, I'm going to have a flash hash map, and I'm going to have, like, let's say I have 3 fields, name, password, and email, and I could have a possible error for each, right? So I could just basically store in different keys and see, like, I could have a key that's error name, error email, or error password, and then have different checks at each portion of the form to show what I displayed. That being said, there is other gems out there that basically do this for you. And what a gem is a Ruby library. A lot of people have, like, obviously, they've had this problem where they want to show errors next to their forms, and people have already made things for you guys to basically put the errors right next to it. It's just something that people have to, like, look for. It's like, oh, where can I find a better form? And then, like, a form gem will pop up on your Google search. All right, any more questions about that? Okay, moving on to the cool part. So the last topic I wanted to talk about today was the concept of relations, or how two objects relate to each other, right? What I'm going to do in this app is I'm going to run Rails G, which stands for Rails Generate. I'm going to create a model, right? I'm going to call it cat. I'm going to create a cat model. And let's say a user has a cat. Therefore, what does a cat therefore belongs to a user, right? And if you remember from the slides, that means, like, we have a user table. It has its own IDs, right? I'm about to create this cat model, and using this generator is going to create a migration for me to create a cat table with, like, attributes like name, string, and stuff like that. I'll just keep it simple, name and string. But then if you remember, the one column, or the one thing this cat needs to do is it needs to know how to find its owner or its users, and you have to store that in the database. So what I'm going to do is type in user references. Press enter. So what happened here, I'm just gonna create the two important files we want to look at is the migration file and the models cat.rb. I'm going to first show the migration file. So I'm going to go create cats. If you look at this, this migration defines a change. What it does, it creates a cats table. It has this string, t.string, right? What it does, what it has here is t.references user. And what that does, it says, using, like, the kind of string magic I was talking about earlier, it'll say basically, it'll do the same thing as adding t.integer user underscore ID. So that's the same, that's what references is doing. It's basically creating an integer column on our database, and it's just append, and what it's referencing, all it does is append the underscore ID under it. And what the index true means is that we're going to create, like, we're going to have an extra piece of memory within our database to make looking up these users faster. I'm going to run, whoops, that's not what I want. We'll run rake db migrate to tell my database to make these changes. And if I look at my schema.rb, you see in my cats table, it actually does have a column that's it's a integer column, which is user underscore ID. And that's how it will match up to the user that owns it. Yes? Yeah. The what? I can't quite hear you, sorry. Add foreign key, it's saying that if you take 186, you learn about databases, what foreign keys are. It's basically it's a column that's saying, oh, it's a lookup to another database. It's not another database, sorry. It's a lookup to entries on another table. Oh, no, don't ever, you shouldn't try to mess with these manually, I guess, until, like, you've worked with it a little while. Like, if you were to just do the migration with t.integer, like, sorry, like, I'll just show an example later, I guess, where you don't need to use references and just use the integer and it should be fine. But just you don't have to worry about that, I guess. Usually you don't want to edit your migration files yourself, especially like these ones. Sorry, where is it going? Oh, cat.rb. And right there with my Rails generator, because I use references rather than generating the ID, like I said references user rather than integer colon, or sorry, user underscore ID colon integer, it did this extra helpful logic to me that says, oh, this cat belongs to a user. This user.rb, I'm going to say has one cat. Okay. Why did we do this? It allows us to go in our Rails console, say c equals cat.new. And you can see like all the columns here, it has a user ID, right? I say u equals user.first. So that's the first user in the database. That's me. I'm gonna set the cat name really quick just for funsies. Okay, so if I wanted to set the column to make it look up to user, I could simply say c.user underscore ID equals like 1, since that's my user's ID, right? But what this belongs to in the code, right here, this belongs to user. What allows me to do is say c.user, rather than hand in an ID with an integer, I could just hand it the whole object. And what it will allow me to do is infer the ID. It'll just set its own ID through this object. And that's just really helpful logic. So instead of like passing IDs to relationships, you could just pass in whole objects, which makes your code look a lot cleaner. So I could do c.save, and now I have a cat in my database, right? If I do u.cat, I find that cat. And this is what's happening. There's a cat column, right? And I say that within my code, oh shit, okay. Within my user.rb, I say it has one cat. So when I do .cat on the user, I'm gonna say, hey, look at the cat table and find me the cat that has, whose user ID is the same as my ID. And that's how I was able to find this cat. So if I were to go onto the show.html.erb and just do @user.cat, .name, put that in embedded Ruby. I go to user/1, you can see my cat, and I named it Hi, if you remember. And the last thing I want to show you is the natural progression from this, from has one to has many cats. So, yeah, go ahead.
If you left out has one cat and user, everything would still work, right? You just wouldn't be able to do user.cat.
Yeah, everything would still work other than the fact I can't do user.cat because it'll be like, oh, cat is undefined for a user. And it would work the same with the cat. You know how I said cat.user equals u, where I set it to a user object? If I didn't define the belongs to there, it would basically say that method's undefined. All right, so continuing on, has many cats. So basically on a cat table, right? There's nothing preventing a cat from having, or multiple cats having the same user, because I could create cat number 2 and has user ID 1, or cat number 3 and has user ID 3. If you really want like a one-to-one relationship with like there's a one user could only have one cat, you could just put a validation on the users and a validation on the cat just to make sure none of that happens. But most of the time, well, for this example, just like in real life, that you well, not probably, I don't know cat people, but like there's a good chance you could have multiple pets, and a lot of people have multiple cats. So using a has many cats, I could basically, I'm gonna just restart my console real quick. So I already have u equals user.first. U.cat doesn't exist anymore, but I have u.cats. And what it is, it's an associative, it's an association, it's a collection. Basically, it's similar to an array, right? So if I defined a new cat, let's do cat.create. And I'll just pass in this hash users :u. So it's just a hash map where I say the user is what I defined as u. I'm going to put the second cat in there, and when I do u.cats, I should have 2 cats there now. I didn't give a name to the second cat, so I'm going to do c equals cat.find2 c.update. Just patch it a hash of name and by. It does that transaction. And in my show.html.erb, I could do user.cats.each to, if you remember the kind of for loop Ruby syntax from last time. I'm going to define the variable cat within this for loop. I'll do p name. I have to put that in embedded Ruby. Okay. Now when I refresh this, it should have all my cats showing up on the page. Do you guys have any questions? All right. So this wasn't planned, but I'll just do the example of creating something without using references. And then I'm just going to create a dog, Rails G model dog. And I'll just say it has a user ID that is an integer. Break db migrate. So right now I created a dogs model. It has this integer called user ID. Within dog.rb, it doesn't have a belongs to. So before, if you remember my example, I used the word references instead without the ID. When I try to do it manually with integers, it doesn't give me the natural belongs to. So I'm gonna say it's gonna belongs to a user. Picture, pop open my Rails console. U equals user.first, D equals dog.new, D.user equals u, and it'll accept that because of the belongs to I defined. And all I have to do is do d.save, and it successfully inserted. So if we do dog equals dog.first, dog.user, what it returns back to me is the first user, which was me. So yeah, that's the end of my little presentation. So the project I was talking about that was going to be due the week following spring break, it's not going to be released until Saturday night. So you guys could sit tight. Obviously, if you have any questions from the previous homework, I'm here till 7, and I'm going to set up the check-in code really quickly. Oh yeah, what's up? Can I upload what? Oh, like the whole code? Okay, yeah.